sometimes when we go through something that's that extreme and intense, it kind of snaps us into reality in a lot of ways, and it makes us go, wait a minute, what am I doing? And how can I change who I am and what I'm doing? Okay. I think a lot of things that I was doing before, maybe they weren't congruent with who I was as a person.
Okay, everybody, welcome back to Connected Conversations Season 3. This is a very special international edition of Connected Conversations. Today, I have with me somebody that I met recently. I met this person at this past year's Cornet event. We had a very long conversation where I found who she was and what she did to be very interesting. And that person I'm speaking about is Monique Pothoff. I practiced that many times to get it right. From MP Consulting International. She's a client advocate, and she also hosts a podcast called ARC Talks. Monique, welcome to Connected Conversations, the international edition. And it's only international because you're here.
Thanks, Bob. Thank you for the intro. I appreciate it. Nice being here.
Do we need to run any of that back in French?
I mean, we could, but you know what? I spoke French all day, so I'm good.
You're over it? Okay. I took 3 years of French in high school and it did not go well. I told you that earlier. So I'm not even going to try to introduce you in French. I was hoping to, but we didn't quite get there.
We can do lessons later. No worries.
Please no. Please no. So, Monique, if you could, can you please take us through your background, your statement of qualification, how you ended up to where you are today?
Sure. So I actually, if you go way far back, since childhood, I've been really into art. And I've been an artist my whole life. I was going to go into art for my studies. And then I decided at the last minute that I don't know, it's just a little too uncertain for me. So I went into interior design. So I went and got my degree in interior architecture and design. And then I was like, I really like the business side of things and the strategy. So what can I do? So I went back to school and I got my MBA. And I was like, okay, what can I do with that? And that was not easy. I remember spending like hours with, counselors and other people in the industry to try to figure out what I could do. And no one could really help point me in the right direction. So I ended up just going into workplace design and strategy. And I was a design manager for 7 designers. And they were also a Herman Miller distributor. Okay. So we were into living office. I don't know if you're familiar with that. But it's a way of doing programming, and it's really effective actually. And I miss working with that, but it gave me a lot of ideas for how to understand client needs moving forward. And I did the same thing when I moved to France. So lots of workplace strategy. I actually lost my job during COVID. There was a huge layoff where I was working. It was called Art Desk. And that was a huge period of reflection for me, and a lot changed about my life during that time. And then I decided to start my own business.
Okay. So talk to me a little bit about this reflection. So again, like I this season we're really getting into, and before we get into the main topic, talk to me about this process of going through the reflection during the pandemic. I want to hear about that.
So, I think sometimes when we go through something that's that extreme and intense, it kind of snaps us into reality in a lot of ways. And it makes us go, wait a minute, what am I doing? And how can I change who I am and what I'm doing? Okay. I think a lot of things that I was doing before, maybe they weren't congruent with who I was as a person. I was underutilized in the roles that I took. And I really tied my identity to my job. It was like, if my job was going well, everything was fine. But if my job wasn't going well, nothing was fine. And I realized how attached I was when I lost my job and had no job. And I thought, well, who am I without my job?
You just gave me goosebumps. You gave me a little bit of goosebumps because I always say, and I know this is, a work-related podcast, and this will go up on LinkedIn, which is very career focused and all those types of things. It's like, I work to live. I don't live to work. And once upon a time, I worked with a gentleman who was very unwell. He got to a point in life where he's very unwell, and he's still attending conferences and still kind of grinding away. And I was like, man, I could think of a lot of other things I would be doing with my time at that stage he was at. And unfortunately,
absolutely, yeah.
It progressed to. So for you to have that inflection point and to say, oh my God, I tied my happiness to my work, and I can't. Do you feel that way now, where it's like, my happiness is my it doesn't, yes, I want things to go well in my career. Yes, I want to be make money and be successful, but at the same time, I can be happy. Is that where you got to, where I can be happy with that, and I need to make a pivot so that I can be more happy?
Absolutely. And, I think it took several hard knocks to get to where I am right now, because so it's complex why this happens in France, but basically whatever your last position was on your resume is kind of your only prospect. They don't understand like why you would want to change and do something else. And for me, I was a little too heavily involved in the construction part of a project, and that is not my thing. That is not what I'm trained in.
They viewed you as like a construction project manager, or like a
little bit. Yeah, it was a little bit too much into that. It wasn't the person on site, but I was like, this isn't me. This isn't what I want to do. And I'm just not using all the skills and knowledge that I have. But I accepted it because I was afraid. I was like, I need income, right? I need income, so I need to do this. And I was miserable. And it wasn't that the company was bad or anything like that. It was just, this was not me. This is not made for me.
Right.
And I remember being so stressed one day. I was shaking, like physically shaking.
I've been there.
And I was like, is this worth the stress? And I'm like, my fear no longer was the big force driving me. And I let that go. I was like, screw it. I am jumping ship. I'm leaving, obviously on good terms and everything, but I'm leaving and I'm starting my own business because I can't take it anymore. And that's what I did.
Wow. Well, this is a perfect segue into the topic, but before you do that, my first job out of college, I got a job with a security company.
Okay.
I have a criminal justice degree, which makes a lot of sense. Yeah, for a guy who works at a software company.
I had no idea.
I came out of college with a criminal justice degree. I was like, well, let me go I wanted to go into kind of like you, like, how can I get into the business world with a criminal justice degree? I went to work for a security company, managing security contracts where guards were at different companies, like the guards, they were basically reported to me, if you will.
Sure. Yeah.
The second day on the job was 9/11. Yeah. The second day on the job was 9/11.
No pressure or anything.
No.
Cheers.
And we were it was the fourth largest security firm in the world, no longer exists. It was privately held. It was held by one man who, at the time, even though we had pagers and cell phones. Yes, I had a pager.
Listen, I remember those days. So
I was not a drug dealer, but I had a pager. The CEO of the company made us keep all the branch offices open, and with only a handful of people who worked out of the branch offices, he made us keep them open 24 hours a day. I had to sleep there.
Oh my God.
When you said the handshaking thing, I remember standing at again, I'm going to date myself, a fax machine, faxing in our payroll, saying in my head, Monique, no joke, in my head, I said, I'm miserable, but I guess this is what it means to be an adult with my handshake.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And I was like, well, I guess it's 40 years of this, and I just got to suck it up.
We tend to assign meaning to certain things. And I thought also that if I wasn't doing something every second of the day, that I wasn't being productive. So I totally get what you're saying, but that we learn later that that's not true.
But I also grew up I grew up you go to high school, you go to college. I had a job right out of college. I mean, it was a couple months, and then that job burned me out. The security company one burned me out real quick. And then that's how I ended up getting into facilities and real estate.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
But this isn't about me, but it's funny because, and this is why I thought you'd be a really great guest. And I'm not trying to boost your ego or anything like that, but you have a very interesting story to me. You're an American living in Paris, right?
Correct. Yep.
And you have dual citizenship, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
So with the theme of this season, and we just got into it a little bit, what I really want to know is, what is your why? Talking about everything that you just went through, why stay in this world? Why do you do what you do? And why are you in Paris? That's what I want to hear. That's what I want to hear. So if you can enlighten me a little bit, like what drives you after all that you went through, all that, it sounded very painful. Why are you still here, but in a foreign country?
That's a very good question. So first I will respond to what is my why. Mm-hmm. My personal why, because I think, there's like personal and professional, but my personal why is to be a safe space so that people can be their authentic selves.
So let me ask you about that. So that means when you say that I'm going to steal that. You're perfect. I'm going to steal that because I didn't think about that. So your personal why is you want to be a safe space, meaning that if I call you up and say, well, I'm really struggling with depression and anxiety, you're here for it. You want me to come to you, and you want to be supportive of what I'm going through as a friend of yours.
That, and also who you are. I don't like to operate on judgment, and I have friends from all different places in life and backgrounds and environments. And I think it's really enriching to have friends that are different than me. So that's a big part of why I'm here also.
So on a personal level, I've heard this talked about in a cultural standpoint in the workplace, to where I said to somebody, well, what if you bring in people who don't really necessarily fit your culture? And somebody gave me a really smart answer, and they said, that's great for the culture, because then everybody can learn from one another. So it sounds true. Like you've adopted that in your personal life, to where maybe you have people from different walks of life, different personality types, and you embrace that. Is that fair?
100%. Yeah. And the reason I came to France, that was your other question, is kind of a long answer. I'll try to not be overly talkative about it.
You're supposed to talk. This is a podcast. Let it rip.
All right, here we go. So my grandmother was born in Paris in 1918.
Okay.
And she met my grandfather, who was an American soldier during World War II in Paris.
This is a movie.
It's a movie. Yeah. And I desperately want to make an Emily in Paris reference, how different I am than her. But
well, you speak French. Yeah. Emily doesn't. I watch it. Yeah,
I do too. I'm a guilty watcher. So they met during World War II. They went back to the US and got married and everything. My dad was born there. But then because of the link through my dad, I was able to get citizenship here. And it was not an easy process. But back to the dream, I used to visit with my family as a kid growing up. We would come here. I think the first time I came here, I was 5. So way back when. And I went several times after that. I did an exchange program when I was 13, and I just kind of fell in love with the country. And I was one day I want to move here.
What age were you fluent in French? By what age?
35.
Oh,
Yeah, I was not fluent when I was visiting. Like we
so
would
if
come
you
for
were
like a couple
if you were a little one going to French school, how did that work?
Well, I didn't go to a French school. I mean, I grew up in the US. I was just
But you did
visiting
the
when I was,
exchange. You did the exchange program.
yeah, that was like 3 weeks long though. It was like yeah, when you're 12 and 13, you can't go for like a super long time.
Yeah, explain these things to me.
Yeah, so I was definitely not fluent
Yeah.
until way, way later. But
Did
it
you
was my
understand
dream.
what the adults were saying?
No.
Because my
No.
grandparents were Italian. Same thing. Like they'd be
Oh,
talking,
okay.
they were off the boat Italian. They spoke Italian, and I'd sit there, and their Italian friends would come over, and
You understood.
I couldn't even spell my own last name. So it's like,
I wanted to make a joke about like it sounding like a delicious pasta dish, but I
please
wasn't sure.
don't. Please don't. Like, I refrained from the Emily in Paris jokes until you brought them up. But
And now it's word. Okay.
everybody, college, anytime I go anywhere, Mustacholi.
I didn't do it. I didn't do it though. See,
Mustacholi.
I have some control
Robert
here.
Mustacholi. Where are the L's in my name, bro? There's no
I
L's
know.
in my name. I think it's
I've been teased about my name too, so don't worry.
so basically your desire to live in Paris came from your grandmother and your family story, if you will.
Definitely.
Now, let me ask you this. Is it everything that you hoped it would be?
I mean, I think I came into it with some expectations, but not a lot, because I was like, I know there's so much I don't know. And it's a bit mysterious, and it's just kind of scary because what happened is, I had dreamed about like living here my whole life, pretty much. When I was 15, I was like, I will be living in France someday. I don't know when, I don't know how. And the way that kind of transpired was kind of a sad story, but it turns out to like a happy story. I never felt like I could move here because of being so close to my parents, and especially my mom. And then she passed away from cancer in 2013. And my dad basically was like, I'm getting out of here and I'm moving to France. And I was like, hey, wait, that's my dream. I want to do that. Mm-hmm. So I was like, well, my dad's going to be, in France, so why not follow him, even though he's in a different city. I thought it would be a good idea. So I started looking for jobs, networking through Herman Miller, actually. And they just gave me a couple contacts, and I would like cold call these French people with my broken French. I'm like, hey, you want to hire me? And they're like, who is this person? And then I would just be like, posting things on LinkedIn, like, oh, I went to a Herman Miller exhibit at this museum. And that's actually how I got a response originally for one of my jobs that I was looking at here. And he was like, oh, I noticed you were at a Herman Miller exhibit. Oh, do you still want to have that phone call? And that's how I got the interviews here. But so yeah, I sold my house without knowing that my visa would be accepted. I sold everything I owned. And I was like, let's see how this goes. And then 6 months later, I got my visa.
Wow. See, I feel like a genius now because I knew you'd be an interesting guest. I think that's on me. This is all me. That's incredible. That is incredible. So sorry.
It was fun.
I'm sorry about your mother. I too went through that. My mother passed away in 1988 from cancer. So
yeah, I'm sorry.
I completely understand what you went through there. But if I could say one thing, it's maybe in a little way that was her kind of opening up a door for you. And that's
totally. I 100% agree.
I look at it that way. It's kind of like these things happen and maybe there was some way of her saying, now go live your dream. And the fact that your father, that's what, life isn't always puppy dogs and rainbows. But you have to look for those You have to look for those little things out of these situations. So now that we know all that, which is an amazing story, there's so many elements to, from your grandmother and your grandfather meeting over there because he was a soldier, coming back to the United States, right? I got that right? I didn't.
Yeah, that's correct.
And
in the Detroit area.
And then you having this dream of living, and you did it. Good for you. Good on you. I'm here to tell you did it, regardless of all the other nonsense. You did it. You set something in motion as a small child, and you did it. So good for you on that. Regardless of all the struggles and everything that went sideways that we heard in the beginning of this conversation, where wrong jobs, lost jobs, pandemic, being in Paris. It's a lot, but here you still are, which leads me to the other half of the question, which you so eloquently laid out. What's your professional why? You talked about your personal why. You talked about how you ended up in Paris. So what's your professional why? Now that you figured out all those other jobs weren't right for you, why didn't you just throw your hands up in the air and become a street artist up in Montmartre? See, I right. That's where up by Sacré-Cœur.
You're totally right. Yeah. I mean, I definitely still do art, not for professional reasons, but for personal reasons.
Sure.
But I kind of almost did my own, table of like, what are my strengths? What are the things I love to do? What are the things I don't like to do? And then I was like, wait a second, if I have my own business, I can just do all the things I love to do and that I'm good at. Mm-hmm. It was so much easier. And it's so natural, like doing this now. And it didn't feel natural in the things I was doing here in France before. Even though there were moments that were really great, I was like, wait, I can bring all these great moments and put them together myself, and I'm in control of it.
Do you feel free?
Super free now. Yes. And I didn't answer your question about what's my professional why.
Okay.
So my personal why is tied to my professional why. Okay. And that is I bring talented people and resources together to create unique solutions. Meaning that I saw a gap in the market here for clients where they're coming from another country. They need help communicating. We were talking about this before. There's a gap, culturally speaking. You can be fluent in English and you're a French person, but you might not understand why people want what they want. So I'm kind of like the conduit between the two to explain why things are the way they are and how we need to do them differently for the client. And when I created my own business, I was thinking, well, I can just make it whatever I want it to be for my clients. So they're coming to me to find the ideal people to realize their project. So actually right now, it's not quite launched, but it's in the midst of being created, a collective of independent people in the industry so that we can make, I usually say this pitch in French, so I'm like literally translating it in my head. But we can create teams that are based on independent people, and it's not from like a big company. When people come over here and they have to work with corporate organizations, sometimes, depending on the needs, they feel limited because they're like, oh, I feel obligated to work with certain people. There's like a very rigid process of how I have to do things. It's very corporate. And to tie my personal why back into what I do professionally, I think because I'm a safe space so that people can be their authentic selves, the clients feel safe with me and they know that I will do right by them. So it kind of all ties in together. And it's pretty exciting.
You're an advocate. You're a client advocate. All right. So now this is me being me. Give us a small piece of that pitch in French.
Do
the pitch.
Qu'est-ce que je vais dire? Je suis en train de faire un collectif avec quelques collaborateurs. On est indépendants et on peut être des équipes sur mesure. There we go.
Awesome. So what did you basically say there?
I said that I'm creating a collective with different collaborators to be able to make customized teams.
Awesome.
Yeah.
3 years of French. I got none of it. You
know what though? It's
none of
there's
it.
a reason. There's a reason why people have a hard time speaking French. And I have figured out the why behind that.
Okay, give me the why. Give me the why.
So the reason is because there is something in the French language called the liaison, which when you're reading words, you literally connect the end of the last word to the beginning of the second word.
Okay.
And it all runs together phonetically. So you're not hearing separate words like you do in English.
Okay.
You're literally hearing like a constant stream of letters, and they're very vowel based French. We have a lot more consonants, and you can hear the separation more. And we don't speak as fast, because if you ever translate an English phrase into French, you will notice that it's 2 to 3 times the length, because they have that many more words to say the same thing. Thank
you. You just made me and Emily in Paris feel so much better about not being able to speak. I had to slip.
My job is done here. My job is done here.
I just everything you just, I mean, this is really the spirit of what I'm trying to do with this season of the podcast. And again, you're the perfect example of what the theme is, the why and the how, and what is your relationship with your career. I'll be bold enough to say that you had a toxic relationship with your career, as did I. I so many times have I been in jobs or roles that just made me miserable, to the point where right before one of the iterations of my career before I came to Nuvolo, I just quit. I didn't have another job. I just quit. I was going to go on some Jack Kerouac, which I'm big on road trips and being out in the world and just.
I can see that.
Seeing where things take. Yeah.
Maybe you should take your show on the road, go all over.
First stop, Paris, France. Knock, knock. Here comes the big dumb American at your door.
They're used to it. It's fine.
I don't know. But yeah, I quit that job, and I was, once again, Monique, I was miserable. I was miserable, and I'm like, I'm done. I'm not going to do it. I can live for at least a year without having to work. And I stumbled into Nuvolo, and I'm not miserable here. I get to do stuff like this where I talk to all these great people in the industry and do all these things that I really enjoy doing. So
that's really cool.
It's really great to hear that you had that journey. I feel bad that you went through that, having gone through it myself, of, having this toxic relationship with work, where the Sunday scaries were a real thing for me before it was a hashtag. Yeah, so let me ask this. I don't usually I usually don't do stuff like this, but you're such a good example. I think you're a good example for professionals. I think you're a good example for anybody who's young in their career. And I think you're a really good example for women. I really do. It's admirable, everything you've been through and where you are today in your career, to stop and start and do it all in a foreign country. What advice would you give, somebody, let's put it this way, let's create a profile. Somebody who goes to work every day and hates their job, and they really want to succeed, and they really want to do something that they're passionate about. What's your advice to that person?
My advice would probably be, let go of what you're used to, because happiness is on the other side.
I have a saying, and it's actually the name of a album, a Canadian band called Our Lady Peace. Happiness is not a fish you can catch.
Okay.
Happiness is not a fish you can catch. And letting go, I think, is really good advice. Because we see it in personal relationships, we see it with pursuits, careers, creative endeavors. Once upon a time, I wrote screenplays, right? And the worst thing you could do is hold on to an idea, to where if somebody's telling you something isn't working, or that character doesn't work, or you got to let it go. Let it go, and the story will evolve. If we spend our whole lives, right, we have similar tragedies that have occurred to us, right? Losing a parent at a young age is a tragedy. But if we spend our whole lives holding on to that, saying, why me? Woe is me. Why did that happen to me? I can't go on. I can't move on. You're not going to get anywhere in life. You're going
100%.
You're going to be constantly.
I think fear just drives so many people. And it drove me for a really long time. So I'm not sitting here like, oh, I'm better or anything like that. Like, I definitely went through it. It was the comfort of being in a situation I was used to. And, I'll get a salary. I get a paycheck every month and I have insurance and it's fine. And the reality was I was not happy, but I was accepting that as my only choice. And when I was so at my breaking point is when I realized it doesn't matter. None of this matters. Just do what you're meant to do.
I think that's good advice. I think just by you talking through it, we just stumbled on, and this is another thing I say we have an office in Boston, and the third floor is where the younger sales team sits, and they all matriculate. They're not all sales now. Some went to marketing, some went to success. Some went into solution consulting. But the first place I go is that third floor. I go to the third floor and I try to talk to every one of them. And just because I love that enthusiasm. I get questions from them all the time. And, if we could really, really convey that message to the younger generation, none of this matters. It doesn't matter. What matters is inside you and how you feel about yourself and what you're doing in this world, because you only get one shot at it. A lot of the BS. And how many times, Monique, did you lie awake on a Sunday night and you're like, oh, that meeting tomorrow is going to be brutal. And I can't sleep. And
so many times. And it's not to say that I didn't have jobs that I didn't love. I mean, I definitely had a couple jobs that I was like, oh, this is amazing and I love it. But things change, companies are bought out, cultures change. You've probably been through it yourself. But, the other thing I wanted to mention is that I'm really happy to open up and talk about my own experience, because I think a lot of people don't have the opportunity or don't have maybe the courage to say, I made some mistakes and I've failed a couple times or a few times or maybe more. And that's okay. If you don't fail, you don't learn. So it's okay to make mistakes.
Well, again, I think we really think the same way. Because whenever I'm dealing with a young sales rep, somebody's on that sales track, I was like, tell me about the deal you lost. I don't want to hear about the deal you won, because you don't learn anything from the deal you won. No. You learn about, and everything I've learned from are all those deals where I stayed up late at night working. My dad used to say this to me. Oh, but you worked really hard. I was like, Dad, that means it doesn't mean anything in the world of sales. I spent hours and hours writing that RFP response. We didn't get selected. That's it. Yeah. But I learned.
And it's about how you react to it too. And I'm seeing that more now as someone who has their own business, especially in a foreign country, is you can't really control it all the way at all, how people are going to react to things. So you could make the most amazing RFP response, like you just said, and you can be rejected, but don't put so much meaning into it. Don't make it about your self-worth or about what you did or didn't do. Because a lot of the times it's like, you'll hear things later. It's like, oh, so-and-so was a friend of the person that was putting out the RFP. I mean, we've all heard that, right? And that's just how life goes. So I see it now. I see rejection, quote unquote, as something very different. It's just people who are not aligned with me, and that's okay.
Yeah, because there's plenty of other clients out there. I say that's another thing I say to sales reps or a deal I'm on. I didn't want to work. I don't think they would have been a good client for us. Like they would have been difficult to deal with. We would have a hard time making them happy. They wouldn't provide a reference for us. Sometimes it's not a good, happy marriage. It's not. But before we wrap up, I want to go back to, because I took some notes before the podcast started, and I was going through ARC Talks episode 7, number 7. Is that episode 7?
Yeah, the last one, yeah. Which
is the podcast of which you host. Very professionally, by the way, very well produced. I know you have a hand in the production of that. You come across as a great advocate. I would sign you up to be my advocate because of
thanks.
How polished and professional you are.
We can talk about how much I pay you later for saying that.
No, but what I want to do is give you a little bit of credit here and bolster everything you said by the notes I took from that podcast. I got to a point in the podcast, again, my attention span is not one of great length. So I was scrolling through the podcast and I got to a section where you were sitting next to a woman and they were talking about change in the organization and maybe reimagining the workplace. And the topic came up as, what is the why? Leadership needs to talk about what is the why. And the woman spoke to how, leadership needs to explain to the workplace community why they're doing something. And then you tacked onto it by saying, just give us the authentic why. Is it to make money? Oh, I took notes. Is it to make money? Is it, I think that's the example you used. Is it to make money?
Yes.
But what you highlighted was, and what I wrote down was authentic. And your authenticity came throughout this whole podcast with you sharing your story. And I always end these with a bit of gratitude. And what I want to say to you is thank you for being who you are, because you talked about, don't laugh. You can take a compliment. It's okay.
I know I don't do great with that.
You talked about in a separate podcast that, it's all about authenticity. And what did you do? You showed up and you were your authentic self. And you are the personification of what we're trying to do with this season of the podcast in terms of what is your why. And I thank you for being your authentic self with us, practicing what you preach. So if anybody ever needs a client advocate over there in Paris that actually don't go to Emily in Paris. Monique actually speaks the language and will not show up in some ridiculous outfit like Emily tends to do.
No,
I want to thank you very much, Monique.
Thank you, Bob.
A lot of the takeaways from this are, you're now telling us, find your why so that you're not miserable. A lot of things that you think matter right now don't necessarily matter.
Definitely.
Come at things from an authentic place. And if you have the capacity to be a safe space for the people you work with, your friends, your family, and you are the living, breathing example of what we're trying to do with this season of the podcast. So I thank you very much, Monique. I thank you for spending this time with us. My name is Bob Massachetti. This is Connected Conversations. That's Monique Pothoff from MP Consulting International. She's a client advocate, and she's one heck of a person, in my opinion. This was Connected Conversations. I'll see you on the interwebs.